My sister dropped her kids off at my house and demanded that I babysit them while she went on an 8-week vacation. When I told her I would report her to the police, she arranged for me to be assaulted in my own home so she could take them back. Unlike real gold, children raised as the golden child rarely turn out as flawless as their parents believe. Growing up, my sister always got her way. No matter how cruel or unreasonable she was toward me, she faced no consequences, and that was largely because she was seen as the miracle child. It also helped that she was strikingly beautiful. She had thick curly hair and light eyes, while I had straight hair and dark eyes. My mom spent years comparing our looks, constantly pointing out that I wasn't as pretty as my sister. Once we became teenagers, the comparisons intensified. My mom repeatedly told me to dress like my sister and asked her to teach me makeup. Yet if I ever asked for help, my sister would mock me. That dynamic shaped our relationship. We grew resentful of each other. I believe my sister adopted the worst traits we saw in our mother, while I rejected them. Being placed on a pedestal for her appearance turned her into someone who believed she could do anything without consequences. Meanwhile, being constantly criticized left me with serious self-esteem issues. As an adult, I became quiet and reserved. Some people even described me as a pushover. Recently, I started therapy to build confidence and learn how to stand up for myself. It has been difficult, but for the first time I recognize how deeply my upbringing affected my ability to maintain healthy friendships and romantic relationships. In high school, my sister even slept with my boyfriend during senior year. She didn't even like him and had called him unattractive many times. When my parents found out, they told me to move on. She faced no discipline. That was the moment I fully realized how much they favored her. Watching my dad stand by while my mom belittled me for years made me feel invisible. It shaped how I view relationships and made trust difficult. However, not everything in my life was negative. Being labeled the ugly sister meant I had no social life and spent most of my time studying. I graduated high school with a 4.0 GPA and earned a full scholarship to my top university choice. That achievement mattered even more because the night before I started high school, my mom told me she would pay for my sister's college since she was the eldest. I, however, would need to attend community college and fund it myself. I remember crying and asking why she didn't love me the same way. She claimed she did, but insisted my sister deserved more as the firstborn. When I received my scholarship, I was excited to share the news. Part of me felt proud to finally have something my sister didn't. She had spent high school partying and earning poor grades without criticism, and she was only attending college because my parents could afford it. She wasn't even accepted into a strong program due to her academic record. So when I rushed home to announce my full ride to a prestigious university, I expected some acknowledgement. Instead, my dad simply said, "Good job." My mom didn't look up from her phone. She ignored me for an entire week afterward. When I asked why she seemed upset about my scholarship, she avoided eye contact and walked away. It felt as though she resented me for succeeding. That day, which should have been one of my happiest, became one of the most isolating moments of my life. That night, I wrote in my journal until sunrise. I decided I would channel my anger into academic and professional success. Instead of seeking validation from people unwilling to give it, I would create stability and independence for myself. I committed to becoming educated, self-sufficient, and accomplished, even if I never received their approval. I followed through. I graduated with honors and secured a strong position at the company where I interned. By 23, I was earning 6 figures. During holidays, I shared updates about my career. Extended family members occasionally congratulated me, but my parents rarely acknowledged my achievements. As an adult, I stopped sharing financial details with my mom, knowing it would likely fuel resentment. One year, my dad told me he was proud. It was one of the kindest things he had ever said to me. Still, my mom treated me like an outsider. During one Christmas dinner, my uncle congratulated me on a second promotion and a significant raise. I mentioned that I was considering buying my first home. Several relatives responded warmly. When a cousin asked what area I was looking in, my mom interrupted and said the conversation was boring. Under her breath, she added that it was probably untrue anyway. Later that year, I purchased my home. When I shared the news online, every family member reacted, except my mom. I understood why she might have been bitter. My sister's life had taken a very different direction. Despite having her education funded, she failed out of college and became pregnant by her first boyfriend there. She had only known him for 4 months. Although their relationship was unstable, they had another child, seemingly hoping it would fix things. From what I observed, their environment was chaotic. Her partner barely acknowledged me at family gatherings and never remembered my name. Yet he would show up empty-handed to holiday dinners and leave with trays of food. My sister and I barely spoke once we both moved out. During holidays, she continued making rude comments about my appearance. She often accused my designer bags of being fake and criticized my clothes. One Thanksgiving, she looked me over and said I was dressed like a stuck-up person. She even used profanity toward me in front of her young children. Despite everything, I kept my distance. That is why I was shocked when, one weekend morning after a long work week, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch were her 10 and 7-year-old children, holding overnight bags. They told me their mom was leaving for an 8-week vacation and that I would be watching them. We had not spoken since a July 4th barbecue, where she criticized my appearance again. I had no reason to believe she would expect me to provide free childcare for 2 months. The children looked confused, so I let them inside while I called her. She ignored my first 10 calls. When she finally answered, I told her clearly that I would not be caring for her kids, and that if she did not return immediately, I would contact Child Protective Services. I was already searching for the CPS number while still on the phone with her. When I finally reached her, she dropped another bombshell. Her voice turned cold and threatening as she told me she would call my employer and report that I wasn't taking my bipolar medication, hoping to get me fired. My sister knows nothing about my profession, but my career means everything to me. I couldn't risk anyone jeopardizing it. I hung up and tried to think clearly, though the stress felt overwhelming. Not only was I unable to care for her children, but I also had a trip scheduled a month later to visit my long-distance boyfriend, Eric, in Australia, and meet his family for the first time. We had been together for a while, and I had looked forward to that visit all year. Meeting his parents was important to both of us. Now everything felt uncertain because of my sister's actions. I didn't know who else to contact besides my mom, and unsurprisingly, she sided with my sister, as she always had. I explained that my sister hadn't even dropped the kids off herself. My mom dismissed it, saying they were old enough to walk over alone. She then tried to guilt me, claiming my sister had done so much for me and that I should support her just this once. That pushed me to my limit. I asked her to name one time my sister had improved my life in any way. I told her that neither she nor my sister had ever supported me and that I had always been treated like an outsider in my own family. I insisted my mom come over so that, at minimum, she could stay with the kids while I traveled to Australia. I had little hope my sister would cancel her trip, given how easily she had left them with me. When my mom arrived, she was distant and critical. She accused me of being a terrible sibling and lectured me about family loyalty. I ignored the lecture and asked directly what kind of vacation required abandoning 2 young children for 8 weeks. The situation felt suspicious. I told her I deserved the truth if I was being forced into this without consent. That's when her expression shifted. Eventually, she admitted my sister wasn't simply on vacation. She was being flown out by a sugar daddy. I initially laughed, assuming it was a joke, but my mom was serious. I was emotionally drained and reacted strongly, asking how she could accept that. I said my sister should focus on employment and stability rather than chasing wealthy men abroad. As expected, my mom defended her. At one point, she told me that no matter how successful I became, I would always be the ugly duckling compared to my sister. Hearing that was deeply hurtful. I told her to leave my house. She refused, and when I tried to guide her toward the door, she pushed me into a coffee table. A vase my boyfriend had given me during his last visit fell and shattered. Watching it break felt symbolic of the entire situation. I lost control and told her I would call the police if she didn't leave. My nephews likely heard everything, which added to my guilt. After a long confrontation, I finally got my mom out of the house. Shortly after, one of my nephews peeked out and asked if everything was okay. They looked anxious and confused. Despite everything, they were just children caught in adult conflict. I ordered food for us and let them watch movies and play video games until they fell asleep. Later, when I spoke to my sister again, I confronted her about disrupting my life and repeated that I would contact Child Protective Services. She laughed and repeated her ultimatum: watch her children or risk losing my job. She said I was nothing without my career. That comment hurt because my work has been central to my identity and stability. I asked her why she resented me so much and why she would leave her children for a man. She responded that she could earn millions from this arrangement in 2 months, something she claimed I could never do. The conversation went in circles until she ended the call with another threat about contacting my employer. I felt powerless. Upstairs, while the kids watched a movie, I called my boyfriend. I hadn't spoken to him since the children arrived. I broke down as I explained everything: my sister's threats, my mom's behavior, and how trapped I felt. Despite being on the other side of the world, he was the only person fully supporting me. He calmly explained that abandoning children and attempting career blackmail could carry legal consequences. He suggested I gather evidence by contacting my sister again and recording her threats. He reminded me that given her history, it wouldn't be surprising if she acted on them. Although that idea unsettled me, I knew he was right. I decided to follow his advice. Even while overwhelmed, I didn't want my nephews to feel unwanted. I understood what it felt like to grow up in an environment where you weren't valued. I went downstairs and played a multiplayer game with them. It ended up being surprisingly enjoyable. They were impressed that I knew how to play first-person shooters and laughed as we competed. We ordered pizza and turned it into a small contest over who could eat the most slices. During that time, I realized how much I genuinely cared about them. They were polite and kind, nothing like their mother. They cleaned up after themselves and consistently said please and thank you. Later, I noticed holes in their socks and that my older nephew's clothes were too small. The rest of their bags contained worn or ill-fitting items. It confirmed my concerns about neglect. I decided to take them to the mall for proper clothes. That outing was emotional. The boys gradually opened up, smiling and running through stores. I wanted them to feel valued and supported. Whenever they showed interest in something, I let them explore it. My youngest nephew, missing his 2 front teeth, smiled constantly. Seeing that joy made it hard not to buy them small treats. By the end of the trip, they had well-fitting outfits and essentials. I also purchased Nintendo Switch consoles for them. When they realized the gifts were for them, both hugged me and cried. On the drive home, my older nephew became quiet and tearful. When I asked what was wrong, he asked why I was being so kind and whether they deserved it. I told him they deserved care simply because they were children and because they were family. That only made him cry more. He admitted he felt angry at his mom for keeping us apart. I reassured him that I was glad we were spending time together now. As we talked further, both boys slowly shared that their home life was difficult. The details confirmed what I had suspected. Instability and poor treatment were common. Listening to them, I felt my heart break. When I heard everything directly from my nephews, it confirmed what I had long suspected about my sister and her children's father. Still, hearing it from the boys themselves and hearing the hurt in their voices was entirely different. That evening, I cooked a large dinner for us. Afterward, they played on their new Switch consoles together, while I stepped into my room to call my sister again and carry out the plan my boyfriend had suggested. This time, I stayed calm and controlled. I guided the conversation carefully, and as soon as I mentioned CPS again, my sister reacted exactly as expected. She repeated her threat, saying she would contact my employer and accuse me of being unstable and unmedicated. She openly admitted she didn't care whether the claims were true because, in her words, no one would believe someone mentally ill over her. She continued insisting that I didn't deserve my job. Her tone was erratic, and she sounded unwell herself, repeating the same insults. Once I had what I needed, I ended the call. I confirmed that the entire conversation had been recorded. I now had clear audio of her admitting she intended to make false medical allegations against me. My boyfriend's advice had been strategic and necessary. I began preparing myself for the consequences if she followed through. The next morning, before the boys woke up, I contacted CPS as soon as their office opened. I reported the abandonment, explained our estranged relationship, and detailed how my sister had left her children under false pretenses while attempting to blackmail me into keeping them. I also shared the recording. The agent listened carefully and confirmed that the situation involved coercion and potential criminal conduct. An investigation would begin immediately, and my sister would be contacted. After the call, I was shaking. I spent the rest of the day quietly bonding with my nephews, trying to keep things normal. The following day, my mom called. I'm not sure why I answered, but I did. During the argument that followed, I mentioned that I had contacted CPS and that my sister would finally face consequences. My mom immediately hung up. Although I didn't regret calling CPS, I knew my mother would try to warn my sister. I was certain she would act quickly to protect her. That night, I barely slept. The next morning at work, my receptionist informed me that my supervisor had scheduled an urgent meeting before lunch. I wasn't surprised. I knew my sister would attempt to follow through on her threat. In the meeting were two supervisors and a senior executive I hadn't met before. They explained that they had been contacted by a concerned family member claiming I was unmedicated for a serious mental illness and at risk of having a breakdown at work. Detailed stories about past episodes had been shared. However, I had anticipated this. I provided each supervisor with a folder containing a letter from my physician, documentation of consistent prescription pickups for nearly 5 years, and confirmations from my therapist and psychiatrist. I calmly explained the family conflict and clarified that the allegations were false. My supervisors reviewed the documentation thoroughly. Once they saw medical verification from multiple providers, their concerns eased. They apologized for the inconvenience and explained they were obligated to investigate. One supervisor even used the opportunity to commend my recent performance and highlight my strong quarterly results. I left the meeting relieved and confident. My sister's plan had failed. Later that day, I called her from my car. I informed her that the meeting had lasted only 15 minutes and that my supervisors had dismissed her claims after reviewing my documentation. She accused me of lying and insisted I had been fired. I told her calmly that her attempt to sabotage my career had not worked. She became furious, calling me names and accusing me of betrayal. She said she was booking the first flight home and would make me regret everything. At the time, I remained composed, but once I returned home and saw my nephews, I realized the situation was far from resolved. I began to feel uneasy. My sister had little to lose, and she had always acted impulsively. I started worrying about my safety. I also thought about my nephews. Over the past few days, we had grown close. The idea of sending them back to instability weighed heavily on me. I found myself questioning whether calling CPS had escalated things, even though I knew it was necessary. That night, I checked on the boys as they slept. I couldn't rest. I stood in the hallway afterward, overwhelmed with emotion. They were innocent children who did not deserve to be caught in this conflict. The next morning, I was awakened by aggressive pounding on my front door. When I opened it, my sister stood there with a large man beside her and my mother behind them. Before I could react, the man shoved me forcefully aside and they entered my home. I fell to the floor, pain shooting through my shoulder. I shouted at my sister for bringing a stranger into my house and told him not to touch me, but he did not respond in English. I suddenly realized she had arrived before CPS, who were scheduled to visit later that morning. She had come early, likely to retrieve the boys before authorities intervened. My nephews, startled by the noise, walked out of the guest room. I tried to position myself between them and the man, but my sister ordered him to take them to the car. The boys began pleading to stay. I attempted to pull my older nephew back, but the man shoved me into the wall. I lost balance and fell again as he carried both children out of the house. My mother stood nearby, crying, but did nothing to intervene. Before they left, my sister walked over to me while I was still on the floor holding my head. When I looked up, she spat directly in my face. It was one of the most degrading moments I have ever experienced. Then they all got into a large black Suburban I had never seen before and drove off. I didn't know who the man was, and I couldn't process the damage she had just caused. She didn't allow the boys to take their clothes, their Switch consoles, or even eat breakfast before leaving. I had a severe anxiety attack. I hadn't realized how deeply I had grown to care for my nephews, but I truly loved them and wanted to give them the stability I never had. Instead, they were taken away frightened without shoes in a stranger's vehicle. I was equally disgusted with my mother for standing by while I was assaulted in my own home and the children were removed without protest. It felt like my family had reached a new low. Once I calmed down, I knew I had to act quickly. I called the police. They were already aware of the situation due to the open CPS investigation. I described everything that had just happened, including the man's appearance. Because of my professional background, I am used to paying attention to detail, and I was able to recall the full license plate number. I gave the officers the plate, physical descriptions, and what my sister and mom were wearing. My sister appeared erratic that morning, almost manic. I suspected substance use, especially given her behavior. After providing every detail I could remember, I hung up, but I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't sleep, eat, or distract myself. I kept picturing my nephews' faces. I questioned my mother's lifelong defense of my sister and how that had enabled this behavior. I even wondered whether my sister's trip had truly been worth it. At one point, I imagined what life would be like if it were just me and the boys. I had space for them, in my home and in my heart. If this ever became a custody battle, I knew the contrast would be clear. One woman tied to unstable choices and another with professional credentials and stability. Still, dark thoughts about their safety kept surfacing. Eventually, the police called back. They had located the Suburban after several hours. 3 patrol cars were involved in the stop because they knew the man had already acted violently. When officers approached, the man charged at them and was shot in the thigh. He had struck 2 officers and injured another before being subdued. My sister also physically resisted arrest. Hearing that was surreal. It felt like something out of a crime show, except it was my family. Then the officer told me my sister wanted to use her one phone call to contact me. I asked if she was seeking bail money. He confirmed that she was. I declined the call. I had nothing to say. Although my sister was in custody, my nephews were placed under CPS protection. They were safe, but I was worried. My trip to Australia was only a week away. Canceling would have cost thousands and could have created a poor first impression with my boyfriend's family, whom I hoped to one day join permanently. I contacted CPS to request speaking with my nephews, but I was denied. I explained that I was their aunt and one of the only stable relatives, but the department handling the case was strict. I had no options left. I spent the week preparing for my trip while breaking down unexpectedly at the thought of the boys. My boyfriend remained supportive, but I was emotionally drained and furious that my sister's choices had disrupted everything. On the day of my flight, I sat at the airport bar and looked through photos we had taken together at the mall. I cried quietly, then made a decision to focus on the present and not let my sister continue to control my life from afar. The trip to Australia exceeded my expectations. Reuniting with my boyfriend after months apart felt grounding. Meeting his parents went smoothly. They were welcoming and active, and we spent time exploring scenic locations and hiking. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm and supported. However, when I returned home, the legal process resumed. I went to the police station to formally press charges against my sister and my mother for breaking and entering. The CPS investigation was still ongoing, which frustrated me. Given my sister's arrest and the violent incident, I believed the evidence was clear. I couldn't stop thinking about how my nephews had been removed without their belongings. My youngest had a small stuffed dog he carried everywhere. I had been holding on to it since they left. Some mornings, seeing it on my pillow was overwhelming. They had left without shoes or preparation, likely confused and scared. About a month later, CPS informed me they had officially removed the boys from my sister's custody and placed them in protective care. This meant she would need to go to court to attempt to regain custody. I asked about her chances. The agent explained that it would depend on whether a more suitable relative sought custody. I immediately decided to pursue it. I opened a custody case and hired the best attorney I could afford. I was prepared for a long process. Before the custody case began, my charges against my sister for the break-in proceeded first. Some may question taking a sibling to court, but my goal was clear: protect my nephews. On the first day of trial, it was the first time I had seen her since the assault. During proceedings, the judge referenced my custody filing. It appeared my sister had not been informed. Upon hearing it, she reacted aggressively in court. Security intervened quickly, but not before she physically attacked me and bit my forearm hard enough to cause injury. The entire incident occurred in front of the judge. That moment solidified everything. Over the next 2 years, multiple charges against my sister were processed. With the accumulation of offenses, she ultimately received a life sentence with minimal chance of appeal. I maintained charges against my mother as well. She avoided prison only by testifying against my sister. Watching my mother finally turn on her golden child was surreal. I knew then it would be the last time I ever saw her. I chose to sever contact permanently. The custody battle continued for nearly 2 years, including challenges from the boy's father and his relatives. I remained committed. Eventually, I was granted full custody. The day my nephews came home for good is one I will never forget. They saw the bedrooms I had prepared and immediately hugged me tightly. I returned my youngest nephew's stuffed dog and showed them their belongings, including the Switch consoles. They cried and told me how much they had missed me. My older nephew looked up at me and said, "I knew you would come back for us." At that moment, I knew every legal battle had been worth it.